Here are the Mites, and here's Marco.
Hey, football fans. That was my son, Xander, giving you a nice introduction to our weekly football rankings. However, we have one twist this week. This is the ranking slash playoff show, and we're excited to be this time of year. Early October, the weather's starting to change. It's a lot cooler out. We got some rain this week, and it's just kind of setting up to be a really, really fun weekend. All the games now are in the stadiums, and this is where the real fun begins. We're going to start off with the Mighty Mite division. You've been kind of following this division and how they've been kind of shaking out throughout the year. We really have a four-team race right now, and this is going to be shaking out to be a really interesting playoff run for these little guys, these 7-year-olds. So let's take a look at kind of where things finished up in the end of the year and kind of where the playoffs are starting to kind of shake out now. So when you take a look and when you think about this Mighty Mite division, you have to look at really three primary teams and then an outside kind of looking in, which is kind of a surprise to me. But you look at it, and you've got La Cueva finishing the year number one. And you think about La Cueva. They start off 0-2 and then win 6 straight and really just kind of dominate that division. And really, Coach Olivas has got them playing at a place that you don't see it too much in the Mighty Mite level where they go 0-2 and then come back and do what they've done. So just a hats off job to Coach Olivas and the kids and his coaching staff for getting them going. West Mesa at number 2. I'm going to tell you, that Mustang team is legit. I don't know. Coach Aguilar, I don't know where you have been all year, where you've been hiding this team. But you've been in some close games, have had some success, a little bit of stumbling blocks. But I'll tell you what, right now, you are literally the hottest team driving into the playoffs. And the way you ended the season last week, beating up on Sioux Cleveland, I kid you not, 38-0. That, my friend, and for the Aguilar, Coach Aguilar, for your staff and for your team, outstanding job to the West Mesa Mustangs. And then you think about number 3, and I had to move. I tell you what, Coach Gonzalez and Volcano Vista, you can't now ignore this team. They had a couple of stumbles. Since they lost to West Mesa 20-9, they have done nothing short of win their way out through the season. Really impressive win last week against none other than Atrisco, who they're going to have to meet again in the first round, a little rematch. But those how the top 3 kind of ranked out at the end of the year. So when you look at the playoffs and you think about the Mighty Mite division, La Cueva and West Mesa have earned, Coach Olivas and Coach Aguilar have earned buys. And this is what I'm trying to tell you. This is so critical because all they have to do is win one game and they're into the Super Bowl. You look at the bracket itself, and Sioux Cleveland and Belen, that's a rematch. Coach Aragon and his Belen Eagles and Coach Birch and his Sioux Cleveland Storm rematching from a few weeks back where the Storm came out on top. I believe it was 42-14, 42-12. It was a pretty dominating game for the Storm. But these two get to rematch and kind of see how things go. And Sioux Cleveland finished the year with 3 straight losses. And it just was one of those surprising things. It's not necessarily Coach Birch. It's not necessarily the team. It's 7-year-old football. And this is what happens when 7-year-olds hit the grass. Now they get to go on and play in the playoffs. And this is a turf game now. So the speed and the athleticism are going to show themselves twice as much on the turf. Down in Belen, we're going to see some games, and then here in town with Milne Stadium, we're going to see these guys competing, these little guys. And then you look at the lower half of the bracket, and Coach Gonzalez, Coach Casaus are going to hook again. And those two actually met in the last game of the year, and Volcano Vista coming on top, I believe 39-6. And again, this is probably not going to be where you'll see some upsets this week. You're probably going to see Sioux Cleveland move forward and play La Cueva, and you're probably going to see Volcano Vista move forward and play West Mesa. And that's going to set up to be our Final Four. But for this week in the Mighty Mite division, you're looking at probably a fairly lackluster first round. Business as usual, and we'll look forward to next week when these teams get together in the Final Four, kind of see what things look like. All right, so welcome back. So now we move on to the Peewee division, and it's been a pretty interesting year in that division as well. I think if you followed that division, you kind of know really it's been really a race of 3 teams. There's a few outsiders kind of looking in. It could shake out to be an interesting playoff depending on how some of these teams perform on turf. But we'll take a look real quick and kind of see how the Peewee division sort of wrapped up their season. And, you all know the story by now. The Peewee division really has been dominated by the Volcano Vista Hawks, the Snacks and Smash show. And really, you think about that show going on the road now into the turf, and it is going to be incredibly difficult to get past Volcano Vista with their athleticism and size on as fast of a surface as turf. I think that the work is really going to have to be done through trying to keep the ball out of their hands. I think if you put the ball into that offense's hands, you're going to be in trouble, and it could set up to be a very long day for you. They have the explosive power to score at will, and on that turf, I can see that being a 1-2-3 and in the touchdown kind of game. So you got to be very careful here when you're playing Volcano Vista. As we finish the ranking, I think it's pretty much been the same three as we kind of got to the last half of the year. So Volcano Vista, Coach Gonzalez really doing a great job with his squad. Rio Grande, what can you say about Rio Grande? Okay, defending champions. You've said it week in and week out. But Coach Zamora, he comes out of the gate 1-2, and I think a lot of doubters, a lot of people thinking this team really wasn't as good as it was last year, maybe falling off a step, and then they rattle off 5 straight wins. And this Rio Grande team, at the last game of the year, really that kind of tune-up game you would think it would be, they end up playing the Highland Hornets, who at that point only lost 1 game, and that was a matchup we were all kind of looking forward to, and Rio Grande came out in a very tight match, 12-6, ends up winning that to wrap up the season and really position themselves into that number 2 seed. And then, of course, Highland, the only Hornet team in the rankings this year, and that team is also very dynamic and has had a great year. And, you think about the Highland Hornet team and Coach Salgado and what he's done with them, and you've got to be pretty impressed as well. So that's kind of how the rankings shaked out. But then you look at the actual bracket itself, and, of course, you've got 8 teams competing for that coveted Super Bowl trophy. And, when you look at the top of the bracket, number 1 Volcano Vista playing number 8 Sioux Cleveland. And, that matchup, they met in Week 5. And Volcano Vista handled their business 28-6 and really kind of dominated that game. I really don't see this being much of a matchup, unfortunately. Coach Christopher does have his work cut out for him, and I'm sure he's going to come in with a strategy to win the football game. No team ever comes in to lose, but he's going to have his hands full with Snacks and Smash and trying to figure out things on the turf in Berlin this weekend. You come down and you look at Coach Martinez and Coach Cedillo, matching up again in the 4-5 seed. And, you think about Albuquerque High, and, man, they had 4 extremely tough games to wrap up their season. They end up with Rio Grande, Volcano Vista, and Highland back-to-back, end up losing those 3 games after going 3-1, and then end up winning their last game of the season against La Cueva 31-7. Kind of get on a high note as they're coming in. They ended up playing Las Lunas in Week 3 and beat them 12-zip. But I tell you what, that game was a tight game. If you're looking for a team to possibly pull an upset, this might be it. But you look kind of at how these teams have been playing, and really at this point, I think you got to give a little of the nod to Albuquerque High and Coach Martinez. But Coach Cedillo is going to come to play. These 2 teams, this is probably one of the best games I think of the Peewee division this weekend. And you slide down the lower half of the bracket. And we've already talked about Coach Zamora and his Rio Grande squad and what a great job they've done. And, they're matching up against La Cueva. And, La Cueva has their hands full. They've had a tough year this year. They've been able to pull off 1 victory. Coach Cherry's got them playing as best as he can right now. It's a young squad, inexperienced squad. Coach Cherry's a seasoned veteran. But this La Cueva team, definitely has some work to do. And, you go backwards and you think about how this team, can beat Rio Grande, and really the strategy is kind of the same. You got to keep the ball out of the hands of that powerful Rio Grande offense, and then somehow you got to sneak one in and get by them. It's going to be a tough haul. I'd tell you that now. And you go back. Rio Grande ends up playing La Cueva in Week 4 and beats them 32-14. So I don't know what kind of matchup that looks to be, but odds are that Rio Grande will get by that game in relatively easy fashion. And then finally, at the bottom of the bracket, you've got Highland, Coach Salgado, and Coach Benton and Sandia. And that game, I think, is the second interesting game of the weekend, and where there may be a potential upset when you think about how these teams played earlier in the year. These 2 teams met up, I believe, in week 1, and Highland won 26-12. But you think back to week 1 and how these teams perform in that very early part of the season. That is probably not the place where you're going to find out what your team really is. It's the last part of the season where you're going to find that out. And you think about Highland, they go 3-1, finish on a loss to Rio Grande to end the season, and then Sandia comes out with a nice win at the end of the year. And I don't know. I think about this game, and I don't know what's going to shake here. But if I'm looking at two potential upsets, it's probably going to be in this 4-5 matchup and this 3-6 matchup. But right now, this Peewee division right now, I think is going to come down to really Volcano Vista and Rio Grande. Unless you got something else to prove and say on the football field, those two teams look to find their way to that final game in the Super Bowl. All right, welcome back, football fans. So we move on to the rookie division, the 9-year-olds, an extremely competitive division this year, and really a lot of teams in the mix. We've had 3 primarily dominating teams that have come out of this, but there is a crop of teams right there that could make things really, really interesting as the next few weeks unfold. Let's take a look at it. And obviously, when you think about the rookie level, you've got to give a lot of respect to that Del Norte Knight football team, the only football team from the Del Norte side, and ranked number 1 with a great upset win a few weeks back against La Cueva, and then really had another tough game at the final week of the season against Sioux Cleveland, and ended up winning that game. I believe it was 12-0, and just finished the season on a winning note and come in our final ranked team as number 1. Coach Patterson, his staff, and his players playing a high level. The Price Jackson show. You think about that show on turf, and it gets pretty interesting and pretty fun to think about that speed moving around the outside of that corner and see what they can do on that turf field. I'm looking forward to seeing what that team brings. Number 2, La Cueva, back-to-back Super Bowl champions, gonna make their run. It's a proud team. Coach Sanchez, his staff, and his team are playing at a high level as well. Finished the season with a dominating win. And I think you see a little hunger from that team now. They were sitting on top of the mountain, got knocked off a bit, but now the playoffs start, and they have another opportunity to prove what kind of team they really are. And then finally, Valley, Coach Dow, you can't say enough about that team and what they've accomplished this year. A tough loss against the Cueva, and then really haven't looked back since. So, we think about the playoffs, and Coach Patterson and Coach Wiseman kind of get together in that first round. And, El Dorado, kind of an interesting team. I mean, you think about this team beating Volcano Vista, Coach Cornelius last week, and it wasn't a win I was expecting. I'll be honest with you. I think Volcano Vista, I was expecting them to kind of wrap it up on a high note. El Dorado goes in there and gets them. And, just chatting with Coach Wiseman after the game, and, he's got a fairly complex offensive system that has taken a little bit of time for his team to understand and develop. And he feels like they've got an opportunity here, and he won't let this one slip by. So I'm pretty sure this is going to shake out to be at least a pretty interesting first half. And if things are close, in youth football, you never know how things are going to go. You look at this Los Lunas, Coach Whitaker and Coach Shea and Sioux Cleveland. And, Sioux Cleveland ended on a loss for sure. But, talking to Coach Shea, he has a ton of confidence in his team, in his staff. This is a team that really was a dominating team the first year in the league, took a step off last year and come back this year and really have played extremely well. And kind of flying under the radar. I think here, we got to be careful on how Sioux Cleveland ends up progressing if they can get past Los Lunas here. And, of course, on the bottom half of the bracket, you've got Volcano Vista and Valley. And that just is an interesting matchup altogether. You've got the number, 1 seed really on that bottom half. And Volcano Vista, arguably a 1-2-3 team all year long, and now getting to get together in this first round, Coach Cornelius, Coach Dow. That should be a wild game. And then finally at the bottom half of the bracket, Coach Sanchez getting off on his run against Rio Grande, Coach Gallegos. And, I've said it before, you cannot count Coach Gallegos out. He will come prepared. Does he have enough in the tank to be able to get past this dynamo team of La Cueva and Coach Sanchez? Time will tell. But right now, first round, we've got some interesting matchups. I can't even begin to tell you where there might be an upset or two. I would just say stay tuned. We'll see how things shake out round one. All right, football fans, we move on to the freshman division. Again, an extremely competitive division with a ton of twists and turns that are possible in the playoff run. And this division was probably the most difficult for me all year long if you've been following the show and the ranking and how we're trying to figure out these teams. We definitely have figured out the teams that are kind of at the top, but there's a group there that can really do some damage in the playoffs as we move again from the grass to the turf. Athleticism, speed, and just the ability to keep your mind right in this playoff run is a critical element for you to have a successful push for the Super Bowl. And I think about how these teams kind of shook out at the end of the year, and there were just some great matchups late in the year. Remember we had the Sioux Cleveland Rio Grande matchup for what was going to be the number one seed on the other side, the South Division. You had Volcano Vista Valencia, what was going to end up being the 2 seed on the North Division, and just so many different things that were shaking out at the end of the year. It was just really fun to kind of see how things finally played out. The ranking, whether you like it or disagree with it, this is kind of where I think it all ended up. Sioux Cleveland, Coach Dennison, not much else you can say. Ran the table, played who was in front of him, beat everybody that was in front of him, ends up 8-0. And just a hats-off performance. When you go 8-0 in any season, it's just a great accomplishment to Coach Dennis and his staff, his players, obviously believing in the mission, and now find themselves as the top seed as we go in. Number 2 seed, you can't ignore Coach Caesar and what he's done with this Volcano Vista team. Has taken them on deep runs before. Here we go, going to reload and try again. I think they played well enough at the end of the year. They beat a very good Valencia Jag team, 20-0, and I happened to catch the end of that game, and that's a team that you can't count out. But that particular day, they did get beaten, and Volcano Vista kind of exerting their will. And then finally, Rio Grande for what they accomplished at the end of the year and beating what was a very and still is a very talented Sioux Cleveland East team, Coach Birch. But Coach Gallegos got his team ready, and there were some doubters out there, and rightfully so. Hey, Rio Grande has had just an up and down early part of the year where you couldn't figure out what they were going to get done. And finally, Coach Gallegos strings together these 4 straight wins and puts his team in just a fantastic. So just hats off to Coach Gallegos, his staff, and his team for believing in the mission. They brought on DJ Poole, who I've coached against them both, and I'm just telling you, the Gallegos DJ combo is going to be a tough combo to play with, particularly as you move on to the turf. They've got a lot of things that they've gone through as a coaching unit, and I look for interesting things to happen with this Rio Grande team. So you kind of watch how things finally kind of shook out as everything kind of finished, and that the first game, that Sioux Cleveland against Volcano Vista East. You remember Volcano Vista East kind of snuck in. Atrisco lost their last game, and Volcano Vista East had to win to get in, and they did that. And it's just funny. Coach Wiley and this East team, I think it's one of those teams where I've seen them play, and they come to the field with energy and enthusiasm, and kind of one of those teams you really can't knock them around mentally. I mean, yeah, they've lost some games, but they've won some, and they've been in some tight games against some good teams. And not that I think there's an upset potential here. I don't. I think Sioux Cleveland will get this game done. But you got to be careful here because I've seen an 8 seed take a 1 seed down. If it stays close for 3.5 quarters, and they start believing, be careful. That's where an 8 can take out a 1. And then you come down right below that, and you got Sioux Cleveland East. And this really is due to the fact that they couldn't get past Rio Grande that last game. So now they're setting up what I thought was going to be a Storm Super Bowl, potentially is now going to set up to potentially be a Storm semifinal. And that, my friends, is going to be interesting. But now they play Valencia, Coach Cordova. I'm going to tell you, Valencia has played well all year. They didn't have a great game against Volcano Vista. Okay, chalk one out. But that Jag team is legit as well, and they're going to come to play, I promise you, against Sioux Cleveland East and Coach Birch. I know these teams will be properly prepared. Again, I probably wouldn't see an upset bid here. I think Sioux Cleveland East and Sioux Cleveland will move on and get in that semifinal. Rio Grande, Coach Gallegos against Albuquerque High, Coach Blair. The only reason I find this game interesting, I'm going to be honest with you, is these two coaches have hooked horns for years. And back in the day when Coach Blair and myself were coaching together against Coach Gallegos and DJ, We had some battles, both wins and losses, and I tell you, it always was a close game. It didn't matter what the record was for the year, but every time those two we battled, it was a tight competition. I expect nothing less than this to be one of those games where it's going to come down to turnovers, a penalty, some mistakes, things like that will dictate how this game kind of shakes out. But this looks to be a very interesting game as we go into the weekend. And then finally, Coach Caesar and that Volcano Vista team, we've talked about them. Who we haven't talked about is Coach Maldonado and Sandia. And, this is a team that was runner-up in the Super Bowl to Coach Dennison last year and really has been just flying under the radar, quietly going about their business. They ended up beating Atrisco in the last game of the year, I believe 20-0, and so they ended up on a high note. Have had a really up-and-down season, just kind of a weird year for them. Had some tight losses, extra points, and things like that really being the determining factor. You hope they've cleaned up that special teams game. But you look at these matchups, and I tell you, there isn't really a lock as you walk down it. There's expectations for sure, but I think you walk up and down this freshman playoff bracket, and this thing could be a very interesting first round. Stay tuned. All right, welcome back. So we've moved on to the sophomore division, and again, if you've been following this division all year long, really this has been a three-team race from bell to whistle. Hasn't really changed. No team has really kind of exerted their will to show us some things, but there is one team, okay, that may end up surprising us in this playoff run. We will see. I am not convinced, but the way they played at the end of the year, there is maybe some opportunity. But you get to this division, you think about this division, you really can't help but think about really one primary team, and that would be the La Cueva Bears under Coach Kimbrough. Number one seed from the first week of the season all the way to the end, and really have just been dominating throughout the year. They get that first round bye, and that really is critical at this older age group for a lot of reasons. One, to get your team healthy with all the banging and the size and the speed of the athletes. This is a great week to you got 2 weeks now to prep for your first game. Gives you a long time to prep, gives you some time to sit back in the stands and watch all the competition and kind of see how things are going to shake out. And then at the end of the day, you have a real advantage here at this level, because now you're just basically one win away from getting into the Super Bowl and back in a place where La Cueva struggled historically at this division, but look to be really, really tight this year as they go in for their run. Number two in the ranking, Volcano Vista East, Coach Montgomery, defending Super Bowl champs, playing really well lately, stringing together, after week 2 when they lost to La Cueva in a really tight game, 24-20, they've done nothing short of win 6 straight, come out 7-1, and finish the year in a really good win against a very tough Los Lunas team and Coach Caldwell. End up winning that game and locking down that 2 seed. Really not a lot shaken up there, because the 2 and 3 are going to meet again on the other side of the bracket anyway. But still, a really good game, a good test for both teams to kind of get them tuned up and ready for the playoffs. And then finally, Los Lunas, Coach Caldwell. We know what that team is. That is a seasoned team, a veteran team, really a team that operates really well in low-scoring games, tight games, defensive games, and I think that's where championship teams kind of are evolve in this level, in this sophomore, junior, senior division, is when that defense locks in and you're able to kind of win those tight games, and that's what you're going to be seeing, I think, as the playoffs ultimately get to the end. You rarely will see these offensive explosions at this level. Time will tell. When you look at the matchups, and what I was telling you, Coach Smith and that Rio Grande team in the sophomore level losing 12-0 to La Cueva in the final game of the year. And I don't know a lot of detail, who was playing, who wasn't playing, and how that thing shook out. But I will tell you, that was a very interesting game in terms of momentum and a team's thought processes and whether or not they can beat somebody. And when you play the top team and come out in a very tight loss, 12-0, you can't help but feel pretty damn good about yourself. You're playing through Cleveland East, the number 4 seed. Coach Escudero has his team playing well enough to get in the mix here with Rio Grande. And I think, either way you slice it, you're going to have to come out and play La Cueva. You're going to have to come out with your best A game when you do come out. And you got to remember, Coach Kimbrough is going to have 2 weeks to prep for you, and we'll get a good dose of what you guys have to offer when you hit the turf this weekend. Volcano Vista East in the 2 slot, West Mesa East in the 7 slot, Coach Aguilar. And this is probably not going to be, one of those games where we can walk away and say it's going to be a barn burner. I do think Coach Montgomery and his Volcano Vista East team, slight chip on their shoulder, playing really well, on a roll right now with 6 straight. I don't see them coming out of this with a loss. I think they're going to slide into that semifinal game in pretty good shape. And then finally, Los Lunas and Coach Caldwell against Rio Rancho and Coach Medina. And again, unless you can find a way to beat these 3 top-tier teams, there's really nothing you can say. And again, I don't really expect anything to shake out here any differently than what I, would think Los Lunas to advance in a rematch against Volcano Vista in that last week of the year, last game of the season. And really, there's not much we can say. We know it's a 3-team race until somebody proves us wrong. That's what it's going to look like. But Coach Smith and Rio Grande, keep your eyes on them. I'm not saying they have enough in the tank to beat the top group, but they certainly will make things interesting if they can get by Sioux Cleveland East and Coach Escudero. That's your sophomore level in the playoffs. All right, football fans, 2 divisions left. We've got the juniors, and, again, you followed this division. It's been a 3-team race pretty much from the start to the finish, with some shakeups inside of the rankings throughout the year as each team has kind of played each other. Really, I think the toughest path at the end of the year was Volcano Vista. They were asked to, play Sioux Cleveland and play, Rio Rancho, all kind of back-to-back and really kind of prove what kind of team they were. And I tell you what, they didn't disappoint. When you look at how the season kind of wrapped up at the junior level, and we look at how the rankings kind of shook out to the final rankings, Volcano Vista, Coach Salas, his coaching staff and his team, they had a mission at the beginning of the year. They had a vision at the beginning of the year that they've all bought into. And, that team, again, if you know the history, the Proud Championships, in the first 3 years, then they end up losing in the freshman year and kind of a shake-up in the staffing and personnel. And just chatting with Coach Salas before the game, the Rio Rancho game, the quiet confidence that they have, they've turned over some of the staff, they've turned over some of the team, and just continue to try to rebuild. And finally this year they've connected on all cylinders and really put together a fantastic finale as they ended up upsetting Rio Rancho. Some would consider it an upset, some would consider it an inevitable victory, however you want to view it. Nonetheless, a convincing victory, 24-6. And just, one of those games where, Volcano Vista came to play. Rio Rancho looked a little bit flat. Couple trips in the red zone, ended up empty, and weren't able to kind of finish the deal. But you can guarantee that those teams at some point could and should see each other as things unwind. Number 2, Rio Rancho in the ranking, defending Super Bowl back-to-back champs, regional champs, going to be hanging around. I can guarantee you that. Coach Manning will have his team prepared and ready to go. They've made these deep runs. They understand what's at stake, and that team will come ready to go. And then finally, Sioux Cleveland and Coach Blake. I think they flip roles now with Volcano Vista. I think they're one of those teams that people just kind of count them out. Can they come in and play against these other two? They had a couple of tough games against these two, and really tight loss against Rio Rancho 16-13, and then had a real struggle against Volcano Vista, losing 24-0, and just one of those games that I'm sure Coach Blake wishes he had back. You start thinking about the playoffs and kind of how things are going to go down, and that 4-5 matchup is kind of a rematch at the end of the year when La Cueva did beat Volcano Vista North to take the 4 seed, and then that pushed Coach Mueller and his squad down to the 5. I will tell you something about Coach Armijo. This guy's been through the chain of how to put together a run to get to the Super Bowl. He's had a few championships under his belt. He's been down this path on a number of occasions, and will guarantee you will find his way down this playoff run. So don't count them out. You look down into the 2-7 matchup, Rio Rancho, Coach Manning, Volcano Vista East, and Coach Smith. And I don't think you're going to see an upset here. I think I think Rio Rancho and Coach Manning are going to come prepared. I think they're going to come ready to put together a very strong game and really kind of prove themselves to the championship level that we think they can play at. And finally, Coach Smith, yes, you got your work cut out for you. I know you're going to come playing to win, but you got a bear right there in Rio Rancho to deal with. Finally, Sioux Cleveland, Coach Blake. they get to hook up with Coach Lane and Rio Grande and in the 3-6 matchup. And again, I don't think there'll be an upset here. I think Sioux Cleveland will inevitably get back into that semifinal against Rio Rancho and Coach Manning. And then, up here it's hard to say, but I would say La Cueva has a pretty good chance of getting in and getting another rematch here with Volcano Vista and Coach Salas. So, the junior level, one thing I will say that impressed me a lot about the Volcano Vista team was just the leadership and the generalship of the quarterback and free safety player Salas. That kid knows how to play football, high IQ, learned how to manage the clock, was taking it down to the last tick at the end of the game when they needed to burn some time, had a couple of really nice runs, not designed. He took off on his own, stayed in bounds, just a really good football player, good mindset. And I think, under that kind of leadership and guidance, that team has a lot of potential to take this one in. So we'll see how this first round shakes up. I don't think we'll see a ton of surprises, but we'll come back and see how things look. We'll see you soon, junior level playoffs.
All right, football fans. So we wrap up with the varsity division, and again, it's kind of been these last couple of divisions have kind of been a 3-team type of race. There are some teams on the edge that could get themselves into position to have a run. But when we think about this division, we do think about 3 teams primarily, and one in particular. And this division really has been ruled by the West Mesa Mustangs and Coach Montano and his staff and his players from day one have had a journey and a mission in mind, and that is to do nothing short of win the Super Bowl. I am positive that they're thinking ahead to a potential regional and national run as well and show a presence on a larger stage than this. But right now, they do have to kind of compete and get through the playoff run. La Cueva, Coach Cherry, trying to get to every single Super Bowl since they were Mighty Mites through varsity, are going to have a run here to try to make that happen. Number 2 rank as we finish out the year in the ranking, Rio Rancho East, Coach Perry. Again, another fantastic regular season, 1 loss to Coach Cherry, 8-6 mid-season, and again puts them in a spot where they got to get by West Mesa to finally make it through. So when we look at the bracket, the way it's shaken out, La Cueva and Atrisco and Coach Orona will get together in round 1, and Atrisco, I had a chance to watch them against West Mesa, final game of the season, and they lost 40-8, 40-6. And it wasn't necessarily a close game, but there were moments, in that game where you felt like Atrisco had a little bit of momentum, and then a turnover or a poor play ends up shifting things around. And, I think they cleaned that thing up, and they might have themselves a chance to compete with Coach Cherry and La Cueva. You come down a layer below that, and Sioux Cleveland and Coach Brody and Volcano Vista and Coach Jones, and that sets up to be a pretty interesting matchup. Coach Brody, really the only team this year to give West Mesa a little bit of a struggle. They did end up losing to them. I think it was 24-8. It was a tight game. A lot of that game really kind of revolves down to quick starts by West Mesa and how they end up getting off to a great start. Coach Brody will have his team ready to go as they come through this playoff run, but this sets up to be kind of an interesting matchup with Coach Jones. West Mesa, obviously, Coach Montano against Volcano Vista North. Coach Herzog, you got your hands full, Coach Herzog. I know you and your team and your squad are going to come in ready to win. You got a lot to go here to knock off this dynamic team. I think the only way to really knock a team like this off is to somehow manage the football, manage the clock, keep things in your hands, ground and pound, good defense, all the things you hope, disciplined football, no mistakes, no turnovers, basically play the perfect game and then have a couple things go your way. And I think you might have a chance here, but right now I don't see that really shaking out to be an upset type of matchup. And then finally, Rio Rancho East and Coach Perry against Coach Orozco and Valley. And Valley had a tough end of the season, losing to Sioux Cleveland, and kind of end up winding up in that 6th seed. I will tell you that Coach Perry hasn't played West Mesa yet, and is a team certainly to be reckoned with. And as you kind of think about how these things are going to kind of come into that semifinal area, it looks like West Mesa and Rio Rancho East are going to have a chance here to kind of meet in that semifinal. And it's hard to say here, but probably Sioux Cleveland and Coach Cherry and La Cueva will meet in that semifinal, and then obviously the winners will go on to the Super Bowl. But I'm not going to count out a couple teams in here because I just don't know when teams come to play at the varsity level. These playoffs typically are not normally, in this first round you do see some blowouts, I'm not going to lie to you, but there's usually one game in here. One game you didn't see coming. And so I'm hoping we get some of that as we kind of go through. But this is going to wrap up our playoff version of the ranking show. Next week, we'll come back and look at all the semifinals from top to bottom and kind of see where things are going to head as we get ready for Super Bowl weekend in a couple weeks. But for this week, thank you for joining me, and we'll see you next week on the flip side.